On this episode of Kibbe on Liberty, I finally get to meet Josie, the Redheaded Libertarian, in person, and we are going to go through some history lessons. I learned some things. She corrected me on some of my mistakes, and we're going to talk about all sorts of cool stuff. Check it out. Welcome to Kibbe on Liberty. Josie, the Redheaded Libertarian. I have to say that I read on the internet, according to various trolls, that you don't actually exist. So it's kind of exciting to see that you are, in fact, a human being, and welcome. I'm glad we finally get to meet.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
And yes, I do exist.
Yeah.
Not AI.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we got some nice club music banging in the background.
We're bumping right now.
So we must be in Vegas.
Yes. Yes, we are.
So what brings you to Vegas? I know you did a show with Luke, and tell me what the agenda's been for you.
It's just gosh, I hate even using this word, an influencer. And I don't like using that, but I'm in the liberty movement. I'm big into the liberty movement. So when there's something liberty adjacent happening, I want to be there. So I come and I meet people and I listen to speakers and I do my thing here, and I'm just really happy to be here.
It's good. Like Rob Schneider was making fun of the fact that there has to be a FreedomFest. He's like, I thought America was a Freedom Fest.
Right?
And now it's like a remnant where we get together and we're allowed to be crazy libertarians, and it shouldn't be that way, but it is cool to be with the tribe, right?
Yes, it is. It's like, all right, you're allowed to be libertarians in this space on these days with these permits.
Right.
You know, and that's just, it's completely backward from kind of what our founders had in mind when they established, no king.
So I've been following you for years. I don't know how many years, and I know certain things about you, and I want to get into the revolutionary history stuff that you do so well.
Thank you.
But I suspect some of my viewers don't really know your story. And as I recall, I want to hear the long version, but you're like a lockdown refugee.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me the story.
So I started TRHL, the Redheaded Libertarian account, in December of 2017. So it was the end of the year. It was after Trump had been elected, and I was living in Massachusetts, and people were losing their minds. And I'm a very pragmatic, logical person, and I didn't understand the emotion that was behind this. So I wanted to first, kind of find people. Like, I just wanted to find one person who could relate to me, because there was no one that really did it. I had a couple friends who kind of got it, but it was hard. I really felt alone. So I started my page. I didn't have a picture or anything. I think I had like my cat or some random something. And I started talking, and my page started growing and growing and growing. And this is before anybody knew what I looked like. So a lot of people thought I was a guy, right? So I'm growing fast. Okay. So I've got 5,000 followers and like 10,000 followers in like my first 3 months, just being an anonymous person talking. And I finally put a picture of myself up. And my past is up in Massachusetts, I did some modeling and acting and that sort of thing. So I used one of my professional shots. And my husband started getting messages saying somebody is catfishing your wife on the internet, because they couldn't believe that, there was someone who was a model that was, I can understand it, so, had to get through that hump first of existing when I first started. And, then the years go on, and I end up it's 2020 and the pandemic hits. And I don't like the way Massachusetts is handling things, particularly with the schools there. I have 3 daughters. And so, we go on, I'm very vocal against this. And I end up losing my account, the Redheaded Libertarian. I built it to about 80,000 followers at that point. And I just lost it for no rhyme or reason in 2021. And so I was like, all right, this sucks, but I'm going to rebuild again. And I started an account called Queen Josie, which I think you also follow. And I built that one up to about 50,000. And then Elon announces in 2022 that he's going to buy X. The next day, I get the Redheaded Libertarian account back. The next day. So, I mean, I think that there was something to it with how they were banning people. Yeah. And I was on whatever level where they're like, we need to put these people back. Like, this is really dirty. So I get my account back, and
it's amazing they did it that quickly.
Yeah. It was the next day, and I was like, oh my gosh. So I tweet out, I'm like, wow, today's going to be wild. And everyone's like, oh my God, you're back. Because I was gone for about a year and a half. Yeah. And then I get a message from my boss, Tim Poole, who hadn't hired me at this point, but he messaged me. He's like, oh my gosh, you got your account back. I'm like, yes. He ended up hiring me within a couple of days of that message, and I've been with him ever since, and I love working there. But so anyway, I'm growing and I'm growing. I'm going to jump back to 2022. So I'm still in 2022, but I'm just going to jump back a little bit. Before I got my page back, about 6 weeks before I got my page back, I had moved from Massachusetts to Florida and started a new life there. So it was like everything kind of happened all at once. So I started this new life with my children and my family in Florida. And six weeks later, I get my account back. And then I get this job at Timcast, and it's all just like snowballing into this awesomeness, and my account just grows and grows and grows. And I found a real niche when it comes to something that was missing when I started explaining revolutionary history to people. And I love talking about it and telling like past history stories about it and discussing. Sometimes people will ask me, is this constitutional? And I'll have to kind of like describe why it is or why it isn't. And I'm very unbiased about it, because I look to these as kind of the laws of the lands, and just the laws that make sense to me. These make sense to me. So it's like my code there, and I'm able to just kind of reference everything back to that and keep everything unpersonal. And that's just a way to do it. And I've just grown and grown, and here we are. Yeah.
Do you have any idea which tweet was the tweet of death that's under the old Twitter regime?
Tim has an idea. He thinks that it was when I predicted Biden and Kamala, and I did that early on, but I pinned it like to the top of my page later. But it was I predicted that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris would be running together on, I think it was the 17th of January 2019. I said, and nobody believed that for a second, but I was like, this is the vibe that I'm getting, guys. And then we find out they announce it like a couple of years later, but I'm not entirely sure. Because I always misspell words. I'm very careful with how I tweet things. I'd never got an explanation for why I lost my page. It just kind of happened. And I know it happened to a lot of people like that. Yeah. So
I was certain, and I think it's fixed now, but you never know. But I was certain that all my anti-lockdown stuff had definitely suppressed my voice on Twitter. Oh, yeah. And, we don't have as much trouble with I know how careful Tim is with his show, because he, if he gets canceled, it's a big problem. But the only video that YouTube ever actually took down was one interview I did with Ron Paul very early on, where he's basically saying, I'm a doctor, wearing a mask is stupid. Mm-hmm. And Ron Paul doesn't say stupid, but that's basically what he's saying. It's ridiculous, and it doesn't make any sense. And it was blowing up, and it just gone. It's gone. But typically the kind of stuff we do, it's not really meant to be what's the right word? It's not aggressive. It's not shocking. I'm actually trying to turn people on, not just yell at them, mm-hmm. but this new series that I'm doing with BlazeTV called The Cover Up. I'm not so sure that I'll ever be allowed to publish that on YouTube.
I don't think you will. Yeah. YouTube goes back and deletes videos that are 10 years old that look bad. Yeah. They are the leader in censorship, and it's great that Rumble is right on their coattails and rising so fast. So many people realize that, and they're making the switch.
Yeah. So you do a lot of stuff on Rumble. Is Tim on Rumble or just Luke?
I think Tim is on everything. Yeah. And I know Luke is. Luke really advertises hard because when he does his show, he does an hour where it's YouTube friendly, and then an hour where it's rumble friendly, so people are able to kind of let loose. But it's weird being on Luke's show. When I speak, I have to really censor myself and be careful. There is like a list of words that you can't say or the show gets taken down. So, so you have to be really careful. It's really hard to have a genuine discussion when you have to constantly monitor what you're saying. You know? But then you get to rumble and it's just, you just let loose.
Whatever you want. Like
exactly.
Even like mentioning, so I did a show just, was it last week maybe even, and I wanted to talk about the cover-up. And just saying the cover-up, Luke's like, let's wait until we get on Rumble to talk about that. And it's like, that's crazy. Yeah. Like, obviously, they know what I'm referencing when I talk about the cover-up, which is probably why they're freaked out. But it's something else. And we can dive into the censorship industrial complex maybe. But I think the reason that they're freaked out is because of people like you. That, you're just someone that has read a lot, you're good at communicating, you're good at translating complex American history and constitutional principles into something that's very engaging and easy for just people to understand. And I think that's the last thing they want, is like sort of democratize knowledge, and because they can't control the narrative. So I think that's the danger, but that's why I'd also be sort of optimistic about where we are for all of the things we could complain about.
Yeah.
Regular viewers of Kibbe on Liberty already know how obsessed I have been with the pandemic industrial complex and all of the stupid, authoritarian, and downright evil things that the government did to us during COVID-19. Well, I'm proud to announce a new investigative series that looks to get to the bottom of all of that. It's called The Cover-Up, and I'm producing it in cooperation with BlazeTV. The only place you're going to see this is BlazeTV, so go to FauciCoverup.com/Kibbe and use the code FauciLied for $30 off your annual subscription. Do it now. The truth is out there.
And I know that what you're saying, there's some truth to that, because I'll see congressmen say things that are completely untrue, unconstitutional, like our democracy, for instance, okay? Our democracy, we all know what that really means, but other things is we're going through right now with the SAFE Act. Our democracy, save our democracy, threat to our democracy, and that's the thing about repeating until it falls into history and becomes truth. We're not a democracy, and we're different from a democracy on many levels. So, but one thing that's coming up right now is the SAFE Act, and they keep saying, this is to let non-citizens vote. Non-citizens need to vote. If you look at every amendment added, this is past the founders. This is, the founders stopped around like the 12th Amendment, right? And after that, they added the 15th Amendment, the 19th Amendment, the 24th and 26th Amendment. All of those specifically say the right of the citizens, and then they speak about voting. Yeah. The right of the citizens. So the choice in what they can do, they can repeal the 19th Amendment and, rewrite it and then try to pass it through the states again. Or that would allow the states to... All right, so essentially, the 19th Amendment, what it says is that citizens can't be prevented from voting based on their race or their sex. What about non-citizens if they're voting? There's no protection there under the 19th Amendment. So they can be, what word am I looking for? When you stop someone from doing something. Infringed. They can have their rights infringed. We'll just go with that. So they can have their rights infringed because they're not citizens. Yeah. So if a governor wanted to say, nope, you can't vote because you're a minority or you're a woman, they don't have any protections because of the 19th Amendment said citizens. If you want to jump into it with it gets ugly if you want to jump into it with the 15th Amendment and voting and slavery and citizens and all that, you can do that too, but the one that's complicated is the 19th Amendment, and I think that's just funny because of the push, and it's not really a push, but everyone's talking about repealing the 19th Amendment, women voting was a mistake and all of that, but it's like now there's actually precedent for it if you're going to try to make it a law for non-citizens to vote because they don't have those same protections as citizens do.
Is the SAFE Act, this is Mike Lee's legislation, right?
Yes, this is to prevent non-citizens from voting.
And it's pretty just straightforward, right?
Yes. And they're trying to say, well, residents should be able to vote. So they're trying to change that, which is horrifying, because that would be rewriting our entire everything from our past. So it's what's bad about it is it could potentially pass the Senate if there's enough senators that switch over, but Joe Biden's going to veto it. So then in order to fix that, you need a supermajority, you need 2/3 of the Congress in order to push it through, and that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So it's terrible that it could happen on that level, but that it would get that far only to have it vetoed. Obviously not by Joe Biden, because we all know he's not there, but by whoever is pulling the strings.
Sure. I mean, he seemed pretty sharp yesterday.
Oh, really sharp with President Putin and Vice President Trump, I know. I was so impressed. It was his best performance ever. He's just that good.
Yeah. It was actually kind of funny, President Putin. That was funny.
It was.
It was funny. There's this old, ancient, first generation Star Trek episode that I'm trying to remember, where the leader of a country or a captain or something, I'm not even going to tell the story well, but he's basically a vegetable. And the apparatus behind him controls him, and they have the technology to make him speak words, but he's a vegetable. Now, this feels like science fiction at this point.
I feel like
and sort of it's kind of a red pill moment, because I am surprised at how little the president actually matters.
Yeah.
And I also think that's true with Trump. I remember Trump wanting to get out of Afghanistan, and his generals basically saying, no.
What's interesting about that is the NDAA was actually altered by Liz Cheney and Jason Crow to prevent him from pulling troops from Afghanistan and Germany, because he had a plan to have a smooth withdrawal, but they knew that would be really popular and then really bad for them. So they actually made it so it was something like he had to go through them in order to pull any troops out, and they were just going to say no. So it was really screwed up that they did that. And, 13 people had to die because of that. 13 soldiers, Marines, sailors had to die.
So you were already a libertarian when lockdowns happened. Yeah. So what's your origin story? Where did you get turned on to this stuff?
I never fit in anywhere. I was...
It's a very libertarian thing to say.
Yeah. I was a history nerd, always been, but I never fit in anywhere. I was like weird, so I wasn't like hyper emotional like some women. I wasn't a guy either. I just never fit anywhere. And then when it came to my beliefs, I was in Massachusetts, where everything leaned hyper liberal. And I knew I wasn't any of that. I mean, especially later when it came to trans and kids and abortion through the point of birth, things like that are just horrifying to me. But this is what it is in a state like that. So, I'm kind of just living my life. I was trying to find myself for a while. I was just whatever in college, and I was whatever in high school. But after I got out of college and high school, and I only did like an associate's degree in a, community college. But after I got out of that, I go to a massage school. I became a neuromuscular therapist, and I'm still kind of working through my beliefs while doing my job and everything. And I have a client, and he's like, where do you fall politically? I'm like, I don't really know. I'm like, I kind of like this guy, Rand Paul. And he goes, he's like, I'm not a huge fan of him, but I really like his dad. And I was like, who's his dad? And this was 2011, 2012. And I'm like, oh, wow. And as soon as I found him, I'm like, oh my goodness. I just found my tribe. It just all the pieces fell into place. And then I just dove into that head first. And ever since, the rest is history.
Yeah. So I had known Ron Paul forever, and I noticed when he started running for president that it was at a moment when information was becoming a little bit decentralized because of technology. And they made the mistake, the duopoly the Republican Party made the mistake of allowing him on stage for his Giuliani epic takedown moment in his 2012, right?
Yes.
And I was just talking about this with somebody else. Inside the room, it felt like a disaster because all these handpicked GOP machine donors are booing Ron Paul. But because it becomes a clip and because of social media, people that had never given a damn about Republican politics, didn't know what a libertarian was, certainly didn't know what an Austrian economist was. Ron Paul starts planting all these Easter eggs, and it explodes. It's because they couldn't censor people doing stuff with that. They if they could just kick him off the stage, so, the way that the Democrats have kept RFK off, or Tulsi Gabbard, the way that they tried to unseat delegates at the GOP convention for Ron Paul. In a closed system, they can do it, but in an open system, they can't, which I think is where all this censorship is coming from, back to the point of why they're afraid of you. Because they can't control the narrative if there's enough people who are curious and learning for themselves. That's their biggest fear.
Yeah. And a lot of what I do is history. And they're trying to actively rewrite that, And I can even find some recent books with it not written correctly. So when I want to talk about history, I'm going to go directly to source documents, artifacts, anything from that era, letters, I can cross-check them against each other, anything from that era that I can say, beyond a reasonable doubt that this is how it happened. And I'm able to find things in there that faded kind of into history as wrong. So for instance, there's the Boston Tea Party was started because of the murder of a little boy. And a lot of people don't know that. They just assume everyone was rioting over taxes, which wasn't the case. They were rioting over the death of this child. And the boy was known as Chris Cedar. But then when you look at the newspaper article from that time, I found the article announcing his death, and his name is Christopher Snyder. It's not Christopher Cedar. But when I talk about it, I have to say Cedar or Snyder because I want people to know who I'm talking about for those who do, but also to understand that history can be rewritten through the years, and it's best to try to keep it intact the way that it was. But a lot of times they'll say the first casualty of the American Revolution, was the freed black slave, Crispin. His name's escaping me, Attucks. So that's not the truth. He was the second one. The first was Christopher Cedar, who was killed by an informant to the Redcoats. So that's another interesting piece that nobody really knows.
So keep telling the Tea Party story. I did not know this story, so.
Oh, the Tea Party or the massacre?
You're
talking about the massacre.
Okay, yeah.
So, so everybody was upset, and they weren't upset about taxes. And this is what we're taught. You were taught that, I was taught that, we were taught that growing up, that they were upset about a 2% tea tax, and they rioted and whatever, and it's just this great gung-ho story. But what they were really upset about is there was a standing army at peacetime. So what had happened is King George had just fought that 7 Years' War, all right? And in order to pay for the 7 Years' War, he began taxing the colonists. And so there were a series of different acts that were laid down. There was the Sugar Act, there was the Townshend Acts, and the Stamp Act. So it went Sugar Act, Stamp Act, Townshend Acts, and that was 1764, 1765, 1767. So when the Townshend Acts were about to drop, the colonists had not received the Stamp Act or the Sugar Act well. So what King George did, he sent in a standing army at peacetime in order to make sure nothing happened. So they were militarized there. And so that's what they were upset about. And these military behaved like military men. And then they were treated differently too. There were two sets, you're gonna love this, it's in the Declaration of Independence too. There were two sets of laws, one for one set of people, one for another set of people. There'd be mock trials, for the Redcoats. Any of this sound familiar?
Yeah.
So a lot of this is grievances that were written in the Declaration of Independence. Like, for instance, the 8th, 9th, 18th, and 19th Amendments all deal with captured courts and a two-tiered justice system. And that was the stuff they were mad about. So that's the stuff they were rioting about. And the riots happened from the passage of the Townshend Act into March 8th, 1770, when the Boston Massacre had happened, and threw on that. So Christopher Cedar, he was just this little boy, Christopher Snyder, just this little boy who was throwing snowballs, whatever, with a group of kids. So what had happened that day, it was February 22nd, 1770, and there was a riot, just another riot, and they were rioting this guy who was named Theophilus Lilly. And Theophilus Lilly, he was a shop owner who was a loyalist. And so what they were doing, they had like boycotted all the loyalist things, the colonists at the time, and they were just using from their smugglers. And they didn't like that he was still good with the loyalists, so they would protest in front of his store. Now, there was an informant that would go and like guard his store, and his name was Ebenezer Richardson. And Ebenezer Richardson had a temper. And so what they had done, they had posted a sign on front of the store that said informant in a way that made fun of Ebenezer Richardson. Ebenezer Richardson showed up there, and he was really pissed. He was demanding everybody, like, take that sign down, and nobody did. So then the riot, like, he was not a well-liked person, so he ended up getting, like, chased back to just some house that was nearby, and he went into the house and he grabbed a gun. And there's the rioters outside. Nobody was armed or anything. They were throwing snowballs and throwing, dirt, rocks, whatever. And he ended up shooting into the crowd errantly, and he ended up killing a little boy. And the riots after that built and built and built and built to the point of the Boston Massacre, which was just another riot. But the redcoats got scared and shot into the crowd, killing a bunch of people, or 5 people, but still there were injuries too. So that's the root of the Revolutionary War. And what is really messed up, but you're gonna recognize this happening too. Ebenezer Richardson, when he was tried, they actually postponed his trial till after the trial of the redcoats, which, as we know, John Adams defended and ended up getting, I think there were 7 or 8 of them. He ended up getting 6 of them off, and then 2 of them stamped with a manslaughter instead of all of them hung. So he ended up, having a fair trial and whatever. But Ebenezer Richardson's trial was pushed past that, and he was actually granted, rewarded by the king with a promotion. And he was not punished ever for killing the little boy. So, this is stuff that we are living through today.
Yeah.
We're living through the 2 tiers of justice. We're living through the captured courts. And it's all stuff that our founders wrote down in their declaration, 27 reasons why. And we're living through 16 of them right now. So if you want any kind of inference as to what we're living through now, as to what we were living through then, our founders will be stacking bodies.
I want to tell you about this new brand that we love here at Free the People. Our friend Jennifer Say, free speech warrior and truth teller, has started her own athletic clothing brand. It's called XXXY Athletics, and it is the only athletic brand standing up for women's sports. We met Jen when she spoke out against the insanity of COVID lockdowns and school closures, and stood up for our freedoms. She risked her reputation to do the right thing, and she's doing it again now. A lot of other brands out there claim to champion women, but only Jen actually does it with her new brand, XXXY Athletics. As a former elite gymnast, she was the 1986 national champion. She knows the importance of protecting Title IX. And as the former Levi's brand president, she knows a thing or two about great products. XXXY Athletics just launched their performance wear for both men and women, including cool t-shirts, bike shorts, and leggings. So check it out at xx-xyathletics.com or thetruthfits.com. Don't give your money to athletic brands who don't share your values. Give it to a brand that speaks truth, stands up for free speech, and puts quality first. Use the code KIBBE75 and you'll get free shipping with orders of $75 or more. Finally, an athletic brand with a cause you can get behind. Go show XXXY Athletics some love. Wear the truth out loud. Go to xx-xyathletics.com and use the code KIBBE75. That's KIBBE75 to order. Do it now.
When did you become such a history dork?
Oh gosh, I mean, I always was, but I liked the Roman history, and I liked, like pilgrims and just everything. I just loved history.
I read on Twitter that only men like Roman history.
I know, right? So I have to keep that low. It's our secret. Don't tell.
That's our thing.
Yes.
Don't make our thing.
So, but I didn't. I went into revolutionary history because I was really I grew up in Massachusetts, so I was surrounded by it. And I just was really getting to a point where I was like, I really loved this. I'm going to focus on this. And it really became my thing.
Yeah.
And being able to just tell the stories to people and have them be like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. You know, it's my favorite part.
Yeah. So, well, I'm going to ask another history question, but then I want to talk about Rob Schneider. So here's my theory. Mm-hmm. It's half joking, but I think it might be true too, that we lost America, not with FDR, not with the War on Terror, but when George Washington listened to Alexander Hamilton and squashed the Whiskey Rebellion. Are you with me or against me?
No, and I'll tell you the real history on that.
Okay.
All right, so what had happened, Washington, so the Whiskey Rebellion had happened. They were rising up because of this tax on whiskey that was added because they had to pay the soldiers for serving in the war. And this is sort of what King George had done, is how the people saw it. King George did this after the 7-year war, but it was like, these people actually fought in it, and now we want to pay them. So that was kind of the justification. And so what had happened is Hamilton said, okay, well, you got to go down and face these, and you got to bring the militia with you. And he did, but there was never a shot fired. He just went down there, and George Washington was so well respected that he was able to just talk to them, and everything was fine. There were people who were captured for treason, and George Washington pardoned all of them. Mm-hmm. Like, he just wanted it to be peaceful. He's like, we have to do this. It sucks. I'm sorry. We have to do this. But there was never a shot fired, and he pardoned everybody, you know, just to move forward with it.
I agree with that, but it was still an extraordinary showing of federal force.
I don't like Alexander Hamilton whatsoever.
Yeah.
And that was a bad idea because it could have turned really ugly.
Right.
Thank gosh it didn't, you know?
My wife and I are Pennsylvanians, by the way. She's actually from Pittsburgh. So
yeah.
We have an axe to grind.
Exactly, yes. And I respect that.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm not a fan of him. I think that could have been handled differently. I think that where things got ugly was actually John Adams was imprisoning reporters, mm-hmm. you know, so they began at one point, everything started kind of falling apart as they were building this new country and saying, okay, well, maybe that didn't work right way, or I didn't like that, so I'm going to do something about it with my power. So John Adams would imprison journalists who said mean things about him.
Yeah.
And what had happened, so I don't know if you've ever heard the story about John Adams and Thomas Jefferson going at each other in the newspapers.
Well, let's hear it.
Okay, so I can't get too.
I know they went after each other.
Yeah,
but I don't know
they were
specifics.
best friends.
Yeah.
All right, and John.
Well, they were bros.
Yeah.
And worst enemies.
Exactly. So John Adams was having people write mean things about him in the paper, and Thomas Jefferson is like, and he was saying, I'm going to arrest these people. Thomas Jefferson is like, you can't do that. We have the First Amendment. You can't do that. So what Thomas Jefferson did is he started writing having bad stuff written about John Adams in the newspapers just to keep trying him on that.
Right.
And I can't.
Trolling him.
Exactly. Yeah. Trolled him. And it was really bad stuff. And it was really racist stuff that I'm not even going to repeat. Like really like half inbred squad. Yeah. Bad stuff. Really dirty. Hermaphrodite at one point. I mean, they were just really going back and forth at each other. I think one of them called the other fatherless. I mean, it was just these really... But it was written in a way that was like, wow, that was intense because of the way that you spoke at that time.
Yeah.
But John Adams ended up imprisoning the journalist who Thomas Jefferson had hired to write all the stuff. So that journalist did go to jail. So something like that, not great. The Insurrection Act under John Adams, not great. And we were just started kind of trickling down and crumbling from there.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. They actually reconciled at the end of their
Yes,
lives.
they did. Oh, it's a beautiful story, too. So Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, they had their fight. And then Thomas Jefferson's wife passed away, and it was Abigail Adams who wrote him a letter, you know, saying, oh, I'm really sorry about this. And he's like, yeah, you know, and took it and everything. And then he's like, but, you know, I'm still mad, you know. But then after that, they started kind of professionally writing to each other, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, for about 10 years. And they just rekindled their friendship. And at the end of their lives, they both died on the same day, 50 years to the date after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson.
Which is wild.
It's crazy, right? Yeah. They both died the same day. So Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. Also, John Monroe died the same day too, but not the same year. The 4th of July, though. Yeah. So So what's really sweet is at the end of his life, they're friends again, and they have so much respect for him. They always had that respect. They just were mad at each other, and that happens. You fight with your friends. So Thomas Jefferson died first. And about 6 hours later, John Adams died, and his last words were, "Jefferson lives." And it was almost like, well, I'm going, but he's going to carry on my legacy. And what's sad about that is that he had no idea that his best friend had died 6 hours before him on the same day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I love going to Monticello, and I'm a huge Jefferson guy.
Yeah.
Supposedly it's gotten better, but at some point, maybe 10 years ago, it had gotten sort of insufferably woke.
Yes. They did that with Washington's estate too.
Yeah. And maybe Madison as well. And it just gets to your point, like history is being rewritten, and you can't really go learn about Jefferson at Monticello like I did when I was a kid. Like my parents took me there.
Well, now you're going to hear about the slavery, and that's all you're going to hear about.
Right. Yeah. But well, I love this, and this is kind of how you built your following, right? You tell these stories, and what has been the most popular one? Like, is there one that stands out? Like, oh, Josie did this thing.
I told the story of the Boston Tea Party on the anniversary, the 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party last year.
Yeah.
And that was just probably the biggest, most popular one. And what I did, there's one historical reference to this. So, and that's called, it's a long name, but there's one book, and it's written by one witness. It's the only firsthand account we have of this written ever. Of the only person who was there to have participated in it. Everything else is hearsay. Yeah. So I took his book. So what there was, they had kind of this oath to secrecy for 50 years. Everybody who participated in the Boston Tea Party, that we're not going to talk about it, and everybody's going to tell their own story. And we're not going to talk about it or tell the story for 50 years. And that was the deal. So this was published 50 years later. And I can't remember the name of the book off the top of my head. It'll come to me though. But what I did, I told the story, and I actually read the portion of it where he told exactly what happened. Because, he had the before, he had the after, but I went through and I read in his words exactly what happened that day and how it went down, and how he didn't know anybody involved. Nobody knew. It was just, if you participate, you participate, and you were supposed to just put coal on your face and carry the tomahawks. And then you all marched to the place. And so what had happened, everybody did that. They all had their coal on their face and had their tomahawks, and they marched to the place. And the tomahawks were for hacking open the chests, because they wanted to spoil the tea. They wanted to make sure it was spoiled. They didn't just want to throw the chests in and have them be able to save anything. So that was an important part. So they all marched down there, and as soon as they got there, they were lit onto the ships because nobody wanted any trouble. They're like, all right. They're like, destroy the tea, but don't touch anything else. And they're like, okay. It was like a gentleman's agreement, and nobody, there was a lock that was destroyed, and Benjamin Franklin ended up replacing it because it was it shouldn't have happened. It was against the rule. So they all destroyed the tea. It took about 3 hours, dumped it all in the harbor, and they really mashed it up good and made sure it got all gross and disgusting and was unsalvageable. And then once they were all done, they were able to just leave and go back to their lives. Nobody said a word. Everybody just knew what had happened, and they needed to stay quiet about it for 50 years. So
I was a Tea Party organizer, and I'm gonna test my history and correct me parts that I get right and wrong, because even long before the Tea Party, we were thinking about nonviolent ways to organize people against government power, and the Boston Tea Party to me is sort of this quintessential moment where it didn't get violent. And I think purposefully so. That was the plan. Like, it was almost the way that Martin Luther King would teach his activists to not fight back. We're not going to take the bait. We're not going to give the enemy the narrative that we're the violent ones. Is it true, not just Sam Adams, but the organizers of the Boston Tea Party, was that the rule? Like, don't hurt anybody. Unless they hurt you. Yeah. Yes. So that's true. That's true. So I've been telling the story at least semi-correctly for years. And that's the tipping point, between that and the Boston Massacre, that's the tipping point. I think John Adams said something, and you'll correct me, something like, at the time of, Spirit of 76, 1/3 of the country was with the Patriots. 1/3 of the country was in the tank with the British, the Tories, and 1/3 were up for grabs. And it was those moments that sort of galvanized the people in the middle to be with the good guys.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's correct.
It's been, I tell that story because I want people to know that how they behave and who they represent and how they say things really matters, because we're not preaching to ourselves. We're not preaching to the choir. We're trying to get like normies to pay attention and realize that lockdowns are really bad. Like masking children and keeping them from school is really bad. But how you, I try not to just yell at the sky, although I do yell at the sky sometimes. What's your philosophy? Because on social media, you have to be a little bit outrageous to get people's attention. What's the balance?
So what I do when I get haters, because we all get them, I do one drag and move on. And that's my rule, to keep it civil and to just say my piece and move on. And then you just don't engage after that. And that helps with civility. And when it comes to convincing people, they have to convince themselves. So the best thing that you can do is to guide them there and then let them figure it out on their own. And I mean, I'm saying that online, and I say that with your family. If you're dealing with family who are brainwashed, like they are badly brainwashed.
Yeah.
I mean, they used Project Mockingbird or Operation Mockingbird technique to brainwash people with propaganda. And the propaganda is so bad. The propaganda is worse than it was in World War II. And that's because they lifted the Smith-Mundt Act, or they repealed and replaced the Smith-Mundt Act in 2013. The Smith-Mundt Act was the Propaganda Act, essentially. They repealed and replaced it in 2013. And if you think about when things got crazy, it was 2013. And that's when all of a sudden we were being fed lies and you knew it. And you're like, wow, this is a really biased reporting job. I remember the first time I felt like I was being propagandized was Black Lives Matter. The first time, Ferguson. And I'm listening to reporting on that, and I'm like, what am I listening to? This is not objective reporting at all. And from there on, it's just the way that it went, and that's because there's no protections against it for us anymore.
At Kibbe on Liberty, freedom is a lifestyle 24/7, something you live and breathe and wear every day. If that describes you, you need the very best Liberty swag in the market today, just like this shirt I happen to be wearing. Go to freethepeople.org/KOL and check out our exciting merch. You too can love liberty and look cool.
I've gone down this rabbit hole. Like my entire project, Free the People, our entire job was to turn on, I call them the liberty curious. So I wanted to reach audiences that they certainly wouldn't think about the Revolutionary War, the Boston Tea Party. They wouldn't read any of my favorite Austrian economists or any of my Randian philosophers. But you could tell stories that would get them to think about what I thought were common values, like freedom of speech, freedom to think for yourself, freedom to sort of choose your own destiny in life. I thought these were just like undebatable American values. And you had your lockdown moment. I did too, because it knocked our entire project in a different direction. Because I was like, this is the most insane thing I've ever seen. And it's
the biggest infringement of our liberties in my life. Yeah.
And I've been doing this stuff my entire life. So I've seen some really bad things as a libertarian. So we shifted our focus on this, but the propaganda and that, the quasi-religious brainwashing. It is brainwashing. The science and Fauci, trust the experts, all that stuff. You realize as you go down the rabbit hole, you realize that this is in fact a government operation, and not just censorship, but the narrative is being driven, which looks to be like all the alphabet agencies, not the NIH, but maybe the FBI, maybe Homeland Security, maybe DOD. And it reminds me of the Church Committee and the way the CIA was able to burn most of the evidence.
Yep.
Luckily, not all of it. So, like, our government's always done this crazy stuff. The difference today is that it's hard to delete the internet. Mm-hmm. And do you know what drastic is? It's hashtag drastic. It's a spontaneous emergent group of investigators, mostly on X, that have been exposing like gain of function research.
I haven't seen this at all.
And I've gotten to know these guys as I do this new project. They're incredibly, they're exactly like you, like smart, talented, just a citizen digging.
Yeah.
And you know, some of them are techies who actually know how to find the things that didn't get deleted, or you can't really delete the internet. So the only reason that I think this propaganda campaign on COVID has been exposed, you know, there's lots of heroes like Jay Bhattacharya, but there's just people that knew that it was a lie that were willing to do it for themselves. Mm-hmm. And that's where all of this censorship comes from, because they're like, how do we stop these people? And they get more ham-fisted about it.
Yeah.
Like at some point, it looks sort of comical that someone at the FBI apparently was like reading Bob's tweets. Mm-hmm. And Bob has 15 followers. And he said something that they didn't like. That's what you're doing? Mm-hmm. So I can't help but be a little bit optimistic about this, even though it's so un-American what they're doing. Mm-hmm. Are you optimistic or pessimistic? Are you white-pilled or black-pilled?
About the future of our country?
Yes.
Oh, gosh. I'm red-pilled in ways and I'm black-pilled in other ways. The way forward, we're never going to have a 1776 moment, because we aren't.
Yeah.
I mean, even when catastrophes, they try to manufacture catastrophes to happen, but we're even more divided after they happen, because everybody has to pick a morality side of each catastrophe. So, I mean, short of a 9/11 moment, there's going to be no unity in our country ever again. But the way forward, so the founders knew this. They knew that tyranny would rise again, because that's just the nature of humans. So when Jefferson and Madison and Jay were traveling to the states trying to sell the Constitution to them, they ended up selling it to everybody but about 2 states plus Rhode Island, who wanted nothing to do with it. But the 2 states ended up saying, okay, well, we'll get on board with this, but we don't feel like there's enough protections for us against a federal government that could destroy us. And they were referencing like the supremacy clause and stuff like that. And so when they agreed to the Constitution with the promise that a Bill of Rights would be added to it. So Madison, and this was 1787. So by 1791, they had ratified a Bill of Rights. Madison had written, at the request of Thomas Jefferson, a Bill of Rights, and he came up with 17. And those 17 were debated in Congress, and that came down to 12 that were sent off to the states, and the states ratified 10 of them, which 1791, we had a Bill of Rights. 2 of those rights are the 9th and 10th Amendments. And the 9th Amendment says, just because we didn't write it down, it doesn't mean it's not a right. So your AR-15, well, that's not what the founders meant. They meant whatever. No, you look at the 9th Amendment and it says, just because they write it down, it doesn't mean you can't have an AR-15, because we didn't write it down in the Second Amendment. You see how that works? And the second one is the control of the government, the 10th Amendment. And that says, if it's not written down in the articles, and it's not written that we can't infringe on it, because there are some that are like, you can't infringe on it at all. And, you know, one of those is the way that it works with impeaching for things like that. Like a state can't impeach a president, you know, so there's separate rules. Then that power belongs to the states or the individuals. So our way forward is the 10th Amendment. So we're going to eventually have 50 sovereign states with trade agreements like we have now, but they're going to be so recognizable, they're going to look like little countries, because they don't have to listen to the federal government short of the supremacy clause, which says if it's written in the articles, it's like you can't challenge it. So like I said about impeaching, for instance, you know, they can't impeach the president, you know, but they can kind of have their own governorship and everything. And we saw this during COVID, because everybody was like, excuse me, everybody was like, oh, it's just a piece of paper. But that piece of paper is why we didn't look like Australia, because I moved to Florida and they locked down for 3 weeks while Governor DeSantis figured everything out. But, South Dakota didn't lock down at all. But then there were states like California and New York that became communist hellscapes.
Yeah.
So, and that's the way forward. And people are going to move to the state that best represents their values. And then they're going to stay there and make that state more valuable to them, because that's where they're going to feel like they have that kind of power to do that. And we have 50 choices. And that's what's so beautiful about a republic of 50 states. Like, where do you want to go? I don't know. Let's pick a place that looks like us. So I think that more people are going to start doing that. Yeah. And that's my hope for the future.
So I'm going to end this with giving you a chance to humble brag about the compliment you got from Rob Schneider, who was here at FreedomFest yesterday. Awesome guy, hilarious guy. And you did a show with him and Luke.
Yes. And
he did 1,000 things. So we worked him too hard, but tell this story to close out.
Absolutely. And there was Clint Russell, who's amazing. I think you know him. Yes. And then Martha was on that show, Martha Bueno, and Andrew Meyer was pushing the buttons. Yeah, it's just an incredible opportunity to be able to do that. But when we're talking, I began talking with Rob about why I think comedians are so powerful. And I'm like, well, they take the way that the leftists control us is they use shame and guilt and, uncomfortable topics, and they make it impossible to talk about without feeling shame and guilt. So they use shame and guilt against people. But what comedians do, they take that shame and that guilt and they soften it and make it funny and make it approachable and make it a way that you're able to talk about it. And that neutralizes the power that the leftists have, which is why they try to cancel every comedian that they can, and they replace them with people who prefer claps to laughing. Yeah. And Rob Schneider said, wow, I should have consulted with you before I finished writing my book. And I just thought that was just the hugest compliment. And I mean, I was a little bit ham-fisted with how I told the story, but you'll have to watch the show. It's on We Are Change on Rumble.
I will watch that because I am, you say that beautifully, and I'm trying to explain, like I do, like the title of the thing we did with Rob on the main stage with Andrew Doyle was Comedians Can Save the World. Mm-hmm. And I really mean it for that precise reason there. And John Cleese has a beautiful way of explaining it as well. Like, we're there, you're able to talk about things once you've laughed about them, and then you can work them out. And if we're not allowed to laugh, then we're not allowed to work things out. We become divided, and it becomes irreconcilable.
And laughter is so powerful, it takes the sting out of a conversation. It's, laughter is actually your body's natural response to something you weren't expecting. Yeah. So it's why, like, when you're tickled, you laugh. Even if it doesn't tickle, you still laugh. And you laugh when a comedian catches you off guard. It's your body's natural reaction to that. And so if we're not allowed to naturally react to things that startle us, then how are we supposed to process them? Yeah. And that's what it comes down to. Yeah.
So shamelessly promote all of your projects.
Of course, I do a show called Spaces with Josie, which I've had really amazing guests on there. I've had on Dave Smith. I've had on Thomas Massey and Vivek and Scott Adams, and just a list of just the coolest people in the world. And that's what I like to do. I like to get cool people on there and just get their story and just, and do that. And that airs on X, and that also airs on timcast.com for members. I'm on x.com at TRHL official. And then, of course, I work for Timcast. So if you want to become a subscriber, help support our work that way. I mean, that's a great thing to do either. But yeah, I'm just really on the one platform and just growing my one platform.
Well, it's nice to talk. And I'm very relieved to discover that you're an actual human being. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Is that a compliment? I don't know.
No, I think
it was a joke.
Yeah, I think it is. I think we're good.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you liked the conversation, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and also ring the bell for notifications. And if you want to know more about Free the People, go to freethepeople.org.